So my name is Mele Manitisa. I'm based in Tonga. I'm the secretary of the PICISOC board. Couldn't make it to Brisbane, but I'm supporting them virtually. So very happy that I can join the discussions and sessions yesterday virtually and also today, and have the opportunity to also discuss with some of our colleagues in the Pacific and also from the region. So currently I'm working in the Tonga Statistics Department and I'm at work at the moment, kind of stepping out, asking my boss that I have a meeting, but yeah, I guess that's how we do it here in the Pacific. But we'll keep it short. I think the person next to me is Toni. I'll pass it on to you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name is Toni. I also could not make it in person. I am based in San Francisco, so it is quite a long way. I work at the Asia Foundation as assistant director in our technology policy team, specializing in cybersecurity. When it comes to public-private partnerships, I think something I think a lot about is in the security side of things. So where are those connections needed to further, the security of the internet and to make the internet a safe place for people to operate? Yeah, very excited to be part of this conversation, and have worked with Anju before in the past. And I will pass it on to Rodrigo.
Thank you. Toni and I are colleagues. I also work in the Asia Foundation. I'm associate director of same program unit of Toni, and my specialization is more in the economic side and productivity and innovation. So I think in the realm of public-private partnership is how the Pacific Island can leverage scale through multilateral partnership, such as the international collaboration forums, such as IPEF, for example, that Fiji is doing to attract foreign direct investment. So I think is twofold. And on the one hand, is how the question will be how to leverage foreign direct investment, and on the other one is public-private partnership within local companies and firms. So I think that's a separate conversation, two different buckets of ideas that we need to discuss.
Okay, I'll pass it to Brook. If you can. Okay.
Yes, hopefully. I don't know if this is actually working. If you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
And hopefully you can see me. I have my camera on.
Yes, we can.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate for all of you. Okay, so I'm Brook Schofield. I'm in the island state of Tasmania. Periodically over my lifetime, various members of my family have gravitated to Brisbane. So I was there recently looking after my nephews, but I prefer it to be much colder, except that's not going to happen this summer, it appears. I used to work for GEONT, which is the Association of Research Networks based in Amsterdam. And so since returning to Tasmania during COVID, I've worked on some various identity management projects, mostly EduGain and EduRoam within the Asia-Pacific region, which were services I was responsible for. So I'm generally engaged in the research and education side of things. And so I think historically research and education has been very anti-public-private partnerships, or at least it's given that view. But it actually, we can't solve all of the problems facing research and education if we want to build it all ourselves, right? That we've seen over time that just the rate of deployment for some things are just too slow. And so a lot of the projects that I've worked on have neglected the Pacific because they haven't had the funding instruments to do any work in that space. So if anyone engaged in the Pacific is completely unaware of research and education networking or EduRoam or EduGain, that is because you don't get invited. We don't know who you are, by and large. And so, yeah, this is obviously something that needs to be fixed. And so historically, there haven't been research and education networks because connectivity has been the focus of those groups, and they've often wanted a virgin network, unadulterated by commercial influence, sort of thing, and that worked. That worked 30 years ago when research and education networks were starting, but these days everyone has connectivity at some form, and sort of ignoring the commercial space and then the commercial operators in their building of the network, will mean that R&E will never have visibility and provide support in the Pacific. And I think that both communities can get along, and the new community of NRENs and research and education networking can actually evolve in the Pacific. But it can't do that if we continue to think we can do it all on our own and without public-private partnerships being in place.
Thank you, Brooke. I think I'll just go back and have another round of discussion on the topic. I like what Rodrigo mentioned about the multilateral partnerships. Would you please elaborate more on that, and how would you, what's your view outside from the Pacific, how we can leverage on that sort of
I mean, I feel a bit uncomfortable saying, what the Pacific Islands should do from DC. I think my first advice is don't take advice from elsewhere. But I think for managing effective large-scale public-private partnerships, particularly with large foreign direct investment companies, there is some capabilities needed that I think that those capabilities could be reached, but at scale in the Pacific Island countries, because I don't think each country will have the capacity of managing partnerships following best practices that, for example, could contribute to better interest rates for subsequent loans, for example, and so on. So I think when I said the leveraging scale is, on the one hand, like multilateral collaboration to reach a scale in terms of potential customers that might be interesting for foreign companies and investment, but also at the same time for sharing experiences and have better understanding on how to manage best practices on public-private partnership, because a poorly managed public-private partnership is kind of like a gateway for corruption and for other bad practices. So I think that's a good way to counterbalance that is building those capabilities on how to, for example, managing concession for infrastructure or things related with that. So that's what I'm saying. Using existing multilateral platforms or emerging ones, such as this Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for the case of Fiji, or empowering with all the caveats and nuances of the Pacific Island Forum, using those tools to leverage a larger platform to create that gateway for promoting investment in the region, which is what I'm saying before is totally different of how to manage partnership with local groups, local businesses, and local firms. I think that's another conversation that each country could do that easily, separately.
Thank you, Rodrigo. I think I'll just give the opportunity to Toni, if she has anything to add from the cybersecurity side of things. What have you done, or have you experienced that works in terms of partnerships? I think speaking from the Pacific perspective, when most of the times when we talk about partnerships, we default to think of, sponsorships and donors. And when Rodrigo mentioned about investment, it's something that comes after. But I'll just let Toni share her idea on the topic. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I come from not an economic background. I come from more of a cybersecurity background. And I kind of mirror what Brook was saying on the connectivity front, but on the cybersecurity front, where I think there's a lot of desire to not have too much corporate influence in the sphere of cybersecurity. However, it's sort of a fact that the de facto cybersecurity is provided by the major tech platforms. And so anyone who primarily uses Zoom, for example, we are, inherently relying on Zoom to provide the cybersecurity for this exact event. And so I think, there's individual training that needs to be done. But when it comes to cybersecurity, the corporate partnership is really going to be critical. And I'm thinking even on a more soft idea of what cybersecurity is, thinking about trust and safety online, thinking about harassment, thinking about all these sort of cybercrime issues. A collaborative and sort of having an open channel of communication with the platforms is critical in order to address any of those issues at scale. But it runs into the same problem, that Rodrigo was getting at, which is scale. And so with these platforms, they tend to prioritize their larger markets. And unfortunately, I don't have the answer for how to crack the code of how to make them rearrange those priorities. But I think everything is benefited if you can get things at scale. So negotiating from the Pacific Island Forum view, or negotiating from a unified group. Yeah, that's an excellent point, Brook. Not just larger markets, but richer markets. So I guess I wish I had like a conclusion. I feel like I only really have like the problem, and the problem is relying on a lot of private corporations for fundamental security and services, but at the same time, not falling into the sweet spot where they'll prioritize the Pacific Islands for those things. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Brook. I wonder if you can explain that.
Oh, so we're not just a large, so Australia gets served well because we're rich. Yeah. Because the accounts, for instance, App Store accounts for Australians are linked to credit cards, and so we will get higher preference because English and money, right? Versus some European territories, which are potentially richer, but the barrier to entry is lower. And so by not customizing, this was said by the keynote speaker earlier, right? No one goes after the blind market because it's too expensive, right? It's simply too expensive. Yeah. There's just not enough blind people. If there was an advantage to blind people, actively you'd be sending around people to cause eye injuries, right? To create a market. So only when an organization gets big, like Apple, do they then have to support other territories, increasingly smaller territories and bespoke territories. Once you get big enough, you can then start to support the Hawaiian Islands languages or support Samoan as a language in addition to English, right? And you do that because you want to actually expand to every single territory eventually. Mm-hmm. So on the priority list, there's this ordered list of who you look after, and many places just miss out. And so I work in a community group task force on identity and access management, and we have benefited for the last, I think, maybe 7 years, having funding to subsidize people to attend our meetings so we could meet them face to face. But that funding only picked Asian countries, right? The funding instrument was Asian only. And so we we were in contact with someone from Papua New Guinea who fortunately was in New Zealand for another purpose and was able to attend one of our meetings, but we're unable to subsidize her travel to any of the other meeting locations. And so we don't even bother to talk to Pacific nations in this regard because, unless they're, we're targeting research and education, so we're targeting university academics, engineers within universities or students, and they just, even our Asian members don't have the ability to attend meetings without funding. So our last meeting was in Sri Lanka. People had to turn up, they had to pay the registration fee, near on 1,000 Aussie dollars, just to attend the conference, as well as the cost of flying and all that kind of things. So we had a marked drop in attendance just because we couldn't get those people. And so because we're trying to build a community of trust, a bit like in cybersecurity, we're in the identity space. So we want the organizations that manage that to be trustworthy and trusted by the community. And so we like to meet them. We like to share experiences. We like to know their difficulties. And if we never, ever meet those people, and that's why we have a separate Asia Pac community, because we don't want to have to, once upon a time, we had to ship Europeans out to meet everybody. And now, we are in our own little cluster, but we don't. The last meeting was actually well attended by Europeans, right? Because we'd been doing work during COVID, we'd had some physical meetings, and now the Europeans sort of came en masse to the meeting in Sri Lanka, but got to meet virtually no one, except the chair from Australia, who was already well known. And so, we have this when you're trying to do things and involving academia, once upon a time, I think, academia helped build the internet, very, very instrumental. There was money to support attendance of meetings like the IATF and things like that, and that has significantly dropped. And so you'll see now, a lot of the standards are driven by the internet companies. This is my cat man. He's woken up for the day and decided to attend. He loves Zoom meetings. But those people are just not able to be visible in that forum, right? So, and virtual is great because I'm meeting you guys for the first time ever, but it's not always going to work for every scenario. And like academic identity, if you look, no one in the Pacific is being involved in this. And so I'll just explain the two programs that we work on. Eduroam is a wireless mobility service. So basically, if you have an account at UC Berkeley, the Uni of Amsterdam, the University of Tasmania, Charles Sturt, you can visit any of those other campuses without having to get a guest account. Now, because the reason people travel to your uni campus is not generally to steal your Wi-Fi, right? They've traveled for some other reason. And while most mobility is within a country, greater than 90% of mobility, unless you're a tiny country like Andorra or Luxembourg, your traffic is all internal. So you go to the National Library, you go to a university. There might be another university with a library, a cafe that's closer to your residence than the university you're enrolled in. So you just turn up. Is Eduroam in PICS? I don't know what PICS is.
So in the Pacific Island countries, are they? Is it just like U.S. University of South Pacific? Do they have? I don't know. I'm just.
I think the University of South Pacific, while it's well supported by AARNet, the Australian Research Network, I don't think they have access to Eduroam, but they could.
Why is that?
Because they're their own economy, so they have to run a .fj, a top-level server themselves. So there is some infrastructure they need to run, and there's some compliance to move from a pilot to a production service. But it's actually very, very minimal. It's zero cost. It's but the barrier to entry is you doing Wi-Fi well, right? Is the sort of, there's no cost for Tonga or Samoa, Bougainville.
Wait, so how do universities typically set this up? Like they just it's
so they typically have a research network, which also doesn't exist in the Pacific, or they have some group that sort of lobbies. And so I'm now in between projects. So I've got a project that's just closed, and my ISIF Asia grant was unsuccessful. So I'll be sort of lobbying Pacific countries to want to participate in the next ISIF grant, and we can actually do work along the way. So basically, you need some infrastructure. You need to have, uni campuses already have Wi-Fi, right? By and large. And the main reason you would shift Wi-Fi to calling it EduRoam and supporting WPA2 Enterprise, WPA3 Enterprise, is that you need a name for your secure Wi-Fi rather than just these pre-shared keys that you may have for your the way you do in home Wi-Fi. And then you need to have an identity management service, so you create individual accounts for people, or you create device-specific accounts tied to an individual. And then that allows you, it would have some value on your own campus, but ideally, if you go to the AP NIC offices, for instance, they have EduRoam there. If you're transiting through Bangladesh, the airport in Dhaka actually has EduRoam supported by the BDREN. And so when you go to other places, you don't have to queue up to get a guest account. And increasingly mobile data is cheap, but mobile data isn't infinite. And you don't want to always buy SIM cards depending on your maybe short stay in another economy. And so then if you had a Unia South Pacific account or National Unia Samoa account, you would then get access to the Wi-Fi network without having to request a guest account and go through whatever is required, to get access at UQ or QUT or other places. And so, and that's the start of because R&E wants federated and delegated authentication, right? We don't want all of the authentication grouped up into to Google or Facebook. We want all of the group management and the information about people and the password resets, to be at the National Unia Samoa. So if you're working on a collaborative project with people in another territory, you don't have to convince their help desk to reset your account if you've forgotten your password, or you've ignored the password reset rules or whatever, because contacting another uni in another time zone and trying to convince them that you're the owner of this guest account may be problematic. It's a lot easier to talk to your local help desk, which hopefully has some process and knows you. And so the next thing is EduGain, edugain.org or eduroam.org, if you want to visit those websites, is to have an account that allows you to access services without you being mobile, right? Making your identity portable to other economies, so you can collaborate with Australian or New Zealand universities without having to get a guest account from those. And while anyone involved in high energy physics or those very expensive sciences will get accounts, will get money to travel, often if you're from the social sciences and liberal arts, you won't be important enough in a collaborative sense to have accounts or have your own infrastructure, right? You're going to be reusing infrastructure at different universities. And so that's what we try to promote. It's been successful in Europe, the Americas, both North and South, because there's been long-term projects, increasingly popular in Africa and Asia, but obviously there's a big void in the Pacific. And then if you look at the maps, the other thing is the Pacific nations just don't, there was a big push to get Australia involved in the early days because then you get to color a map, and it makes a big presence on the planet as this territory is now supported. While if you manage to get, Niue supporting Eduroam, the dot will be so incredibly small on the map that it's just not very significant. Or not that it's not significant, but it's not a target. And then, it's a long tail to involve everybody else.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what Rodrigo and Toni mentioned about scale. Being small is kind of like one of the challenges to be prioritized, is what Toni mentioned. And not only that, but from what Brook was sharing, there's no barrier but Wi-Fi. So it goes back to the connectivity in the small Pacific island countries as well. I think not only that, but the geographical locations, like they're small, but then they're also scattered, and so it's kind of like hard. But speaking of that, would you guys want to share on what could we do in terms of some way forward to what we've discussed?
I mean, I'm very excited to hear what the DCCP partnership, program is going to come up with, because I think that's one of their key objectives, is to really examine the business models and the business incentives behind different companies. And in that case, it's particular to connectivity and cybersecurity. But I think, connectivity is sort of the baseline service that leads to everything else. So looking forward to see what they came up with. I mean, at least in the connectivity sphere, I think when it comes to really like high cost last mile connectivity, the only sort of successful programs I've seen globally are, publicly funded projects. And so there was one in Brazil that, the government sponsored last mile connectivity. And then there's a new middle mile connectivity project here in the United States, which is a huge push from the Biden administration, which is all publicly funded. And so at least for connectivity, this like issue of scale and last mile, I've only really seen it be solved through policy, not and I guess policy to encourage the corporations to come in, because otherwise they don't have the incentive. But I don't have a better answer than that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and even the public doesn't have the ability to do these deployments, right? They are often with public funds, but you need commercial operators to actually trench cable, right, or run services. And while there can be a management company on top, there's the Biden administration program, presumably thousands of different companies actually having to do various levels of infrastructure, even though it benefits maybe a few cable operators. Ultimately will be the organizations that win out in this. But I know when OpenReach was created in the UK as a spin-off from BT, there were some communities that actually built their own fiber infrastructure as community fiber services because they were deemed not economically viable for even OpenReach to do that work. And then, ironically, once they'd provided these services to a community, the OpenReach used the anti-competitive rules to say, well, actually, you have to allow us to have access to your network to be able to on-sell other commercial ISPs, because you can't just have infrastructure that's not open. OpenReach themselves have to build infrastructure that is available to all other operators, but they didn't like this operator, a community operator, proving that it was economically viable to run a service in a rural community. So there needs to be some. Oh yeah, exactly. And so there are opportunities, but I mean, like John Brewer talked in the start about the different commercial mobile operators, and that's largely a a function of how that last mile will happen, because it's much less work, right? You're not having to trench to every home. You're just trenching to towers. And I had the opportunity of being in Uganda a few months ago, and the Ugandan NREN, RENU, actually brokered a deal with two mobile operators and became an MVNO on top of the mobile phone network, and actually make these little Edurome battery bricks. They went to a Chinese supplier to make a Wi-Fi device with an inbuilt battery brick, because a large number of RENU's potential members don't have power. So they can provide a battery brick device into a primary school that will provide 8 hours of Wi-Fi, so that tablets can connect and students can get Wi-Fi and get access in a school that doesn't have power. And so usually the deployment of that would be wait for power rather than, do something in the meantime. And so the fact that the research network brokered, became its own mobile operator, peers with the mobile operators to take all of that traffic. So there's limited cost other than, the spectrum being used by the Wi-Fi devices. There's not actually a traffic cost. And, RENU actually was able to build, I think, a very valuable service. Like, I was amazed that they were able to achieve this, because many richer territories have talked about wanting to do this and then just haven't. The only thing slightly close was in Ireland, where the Irish NREN HEAnet, they partnered with, I think it was the third most popular mobile phone carrier, because obviously the third most popular mobile phone carrier wants to become the first eventually. And they provided subsidized SIM cards for students or for lecturers at universities. They used their identity federation to do that authentication to work out who is and who isn't allowed. But all of those devices are provisioned with an Edurome account. And so people would offload to Wi-Fi wherever possible. So the mobile phone operator loved this, because they get to reserve spectrum for their business customers. And, if you get offloaded to Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi is usually a better service than 3G, 4G, 5G anyway. But it's also much cheaper to manage. And so this operator made Edurome available in cafes and train stations and other locations that it was responsible for, in order to offload those academic customers. But also you get an early footprint into future long-term users, hopefully, of your network, right? So you can grow because you're offering a service at a discount rate initially, so that you'll keep those those SIM card holders as long-term users, customers. And so in instances where NRENs have decided to do public-private partnerships, rather than keep their network pure from the evils of the commercial world, they've actually done some really interesting deployments that are beneficial for a very big sector very quickly. And it's not something they could ever do if they were wanting to do all of this themselves, unless the Irish government would have to have invested an inordinate amount of money to allow the research network to set up radios on mobile phone towers, allocate them spectrum, and do all of this thing if they wanted to go it alone. The same in Uganda. It would just be cost prohibitive, and it wouldn't actually be beneficial to what the community is doing. So,
but in these cases, what is the directionality? Because I think it's important. What Toni mentioned and your examples in terms of what is the business model, the underlying business model that promotes better connectivity or faster connection. So, what is the origin of this? This is the mandate from the public sector reaching out to the private sector as a business opportunity that the private sector sees and then seeks for partnerships. So, what based on these experiences, what is the, who makes the first move?
I think you need, well, the Pacific doesn't have research networks, right? And so the research networks aren't there to advocate. And so maybe universities sometimes think that they're in competition with other universities. And so they don't collaborate. And so there has been a few instances. I'm not from the connectivity side of the R&E space. And so I always wanted services to be the important thing, right? Because actually it's community that's the most important thing about research and education, right? It's getting all levels of education, the Ministry of Education, primary schools, kindergartens, universities, to collaborate, and they have a social benefit for the country, right? So there's a cost, but there's a social benefit, because then you get smarter people and you get industries. I think there was this presentation yesterday about this app that had been, developed. I think it was in the Solomon Islands. No, Samoa. Oh, we'll have to look it up. But so you want innovation because you want services to be local, and eventually you want content. Yeah, that's it exactly. So you want content, but you don't have content initially, right? You can have programs, and you say we would love TV production to be local, and we would love it to be in local languages, and that requires either some regulation or some incentives for that to happen. But the services can actually come along to support that. And so, but if you're a mobile phone company or an internet service provider in the Pacific, the pressure on you is to provide better services and drive down cost, because people want a better service at a cheaper price, and that's the pressure you feel. And that's why we see no one does RPKI, ROA and ROV or IPv6, because these things cost money. And why would you do that when the customer doesn't really want it? Or at least you're not going to ask the customer if they want it, because it's going to cost them more, right? And they're not going to care about cybersecurity. They just hope they don't get hacked. And the ISPs hope you don't get hacked. But the ISP doesn't want to invest a lot of money in doing something to make the network better. And so the lever that the government has is an incentive program that it can either give money to, say, your research network or your universities or things like that. And they can prove that actually deploying V6, doing RPKI, having a local time server, having a local secure time server, all of this sort of basic underlying infrastructure isn't very expensive and is very valuable for the local community. And so I think the government needs to work out what its incentives are, not just on connectivity, but doing good connectivity. And sometimes you need, if you have a research network, then the government has a natural partner to say, go and do these things well and prove to us that it can be done. Otherwise, it's the government that needs to do it with its, national ID programs. And depending on the trust that the citizenry have with its government is how well those services work. In Australia, every time, there's some national ID card debate. Australia card is the term. I think you can find a Wikipedia page on it. You mention this, it kills a program instantly. And so, I lived in Amsterdam for a long time. It was an occupied country, and they still have a rule where you have to carry identity documents all of the time, right? Which is a little bit strange. You would think that an occupied country would have thrown that off. But that affects identity federation architecture as well, because there's two-way main models where the research network is centered to that, in a hub and spoke environment, or you have this fully meshed environment. And certainly the Hungarians, they would have preferred to have this center spoke where they got to ensure that all of the identity elements worked. But they said the political nature of their country is the people don't trust centralized authority, right? So they have to have this mesh environment because people won't people don't trust authority in their country because of their history. And so governments can do this, but often government ID programs have become not very well adopted. Maybe Estonia is probably the only example, of government ID programs actually working. And I think India tried one, and I think their Supreme Court ruled it, illegal to mandate this for access to services. So they had something that was quite rolling out quite successfully, but that you couldn't mandate it for all interactions with government.
I mean, everything you mentioned, Brook, is I feel like is just examples of internet being used for the public service. But I guess I don't see the commercial sort of incentive. But I'm wondering, Mele, if you've seen any examples of good public-private partnerships in your time.
Yeah, I was going to say that just from observation, for example, here in Tonga, most of when Rodrigo was asking who makes the first move, most of the times it's government. So it comes, if they identify this is one of the government priority areas, then they empower the local companies or whoever they're partnered with to kind of make the plans. However, I was talking to one of the IT guys, and he said something funny, but I think it's also true. He said, the problem with us is because government shouldn't be the implementer. They should be the planner and policymaker. But because right now, for us, our government is planning, identifying priority, and also trying to implement the digital transformation. I think it's from a good intention. However, I feel like it's been for a long time. It's been when I started working about 6 years or 7 years ago, they said, oh, this e-government talk has been there 10 years ago. And it's still there. We haven't fully implemented, but the talk is still there. So it's kind of hard, and I don't really understand, because we're so small, and most of the companies, they look for governments for subsidies, for funds and stuff. Either that, they look outside. So outside funders fund them directly to do small projects within their community, or but not at the national level yet. So it's kind of hard when we talk about private and public partnerships, when most of the times it's a government is the one who's fully involved in my case, in Tonga, maybe in some other small Pacific Island countries as well. But I hear what you all shared as well, and it's true. But it's, like you said, Toni, that we don't have the answer. It's like we have more problems when we talk about this. But I guess so far we've been funded by a lot of funders to do digital transformation project. I think I remember around 2005, we had a consultant from Estonia. He was here to discuss stuff about e-government, and then there's nothing. And then we have, it's like sometimes we say it's the fund that we don't have, but the thing is, we have the fund. It's the implementation for me that we'll lack of. And I think when we talk about partnerships, I think that's something that donors can also maybe set policies that kind of push beneficiaries like us to kind of, just do what the fund is supposed to do. But I don't know.
When you say like the government is like the implementers, do you mean that like they're literally the coders trying to build the e-government services, or like?
Yeah, it's like, so we have a department, so we have a ministry, they used to be together, information and communication under one portfolio. Now communication is in one portfolio and then information is in another. So information right now is under our prime minister. And the digital transformation team is under our information department. So I don't really know what's going on, to be honest, but yeah.
Yeah, because I guess I wonder, like, in the digital transformation public-private partnership, if the implementation is where that would be helpful. But I mean, I don't know who, when you say funders, I also don't know, like, when you say funders, who you're thinking of, but.
So we have, for example, we have World Bank,
Yeah.
ADB, they're funding these projects. I think they also funded our e-health project. And also there were, before, our national ID and that e-health was one project, because we wanted, once someone is born, you give them a unique identifier, which will be used for everything else, national ID, health, also education. And that was when I used to work for another ministry, and I left the country, I came back, and I don't know what's happening with that project, but it's like health is moving along, and then national ID is still the same. So yeah.
Yeah, I guess, like, I'm wondering if, like, the roadblocks are technological, like, is it you mean, like, or is it, policy disagreements on what should constitute a national ID? Like, I'm curious. I mean, I don't know if you know the answer, but
I think one of the roadblocks was our legislations, because legislations were written years ago. So they said they have to change that before they can actually change something to do with IDs and stuff. So it's kind of like a long process, but that's one of the reasons.
Because they need to make it legal to implement. They don't have any mandate, really.
Or maybe because it was another, say, different ministry was mandated to do that, but because it's now under different one, I think it's somehow the authority over certain things which they need to change before they can actually implement it. But yeah. But it's like this, it's like we're going around in circle, and I'm not sure.
How do you break the circle? How do you, like, break the cycle?
Yeah, and I think also someone raised before, we had a discussion a few weeks ago, and someone said they tried to launch this e-commerce platform, and they feel like no one's using it because of people like it's like the literacy level is very low. It's either they don't trust or they don't know how to use it, or so they said maybe we can look at digital literacy of the public as well before we can implement e-commerce platform. So yeah, it's here things are very slow from my perspective. I think Fiji and Samoa, they're catching up with e-commerce.
We need to wrap up and proceed to our reporting back. Is that all right?
Thank you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you.
But I feel like what you just mentioned is like a chicken and the egg problem, because it's like, how do you do one without the other? Right? Oh, are we? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, like they ban Pokemon cards in schools, right? Obviously, because they don't like the fights that break out in the trading. But the Pokemon cards are actually
Mele, can you confirm you are okay out there?
Oh,
With your
we might be okay, but we certainly have not come to any conclusions on the public-private
We can't
partnership.
hear you.
Oh, well, then you've muted us in the room because we are speaking.
We can't hear you. Just hold on.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, Toni, do we have any takeaways as a result?
I think, Mele, you can summarize the conversation, but if there is no agreement, you can just state
I
the
think
points.
Tony's point of breaking the cycle of making decisions and going around to try and iterate is going to be the problem. And I don't know how